Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. If you watched my episode yesterday, I ended it on a little bit of a cliffhanger. I said that it would be possible to have something like a clone or a meddling mage enter the battlefield without becoming a copy of something or getting to name a card. You would just need some kind of really specialized tech to be able to do that. Today's episode, I'm going to be talking about exactly what kind of technology you would need in order to make that sort of thing happen. First of all, I want to give a big shout out to my comment section, who correctly predicted that this would be a future episode, and also what I was going to say during this episode. Nice job to everyone who is on board with this. So, what would you need in order to make this sort of thing occur? Well, let's take a look first at exactly how these types of abilities apply. As I said yesterday, both of Clone and Meddling Mage's abilities are replacement effects. That means that they replace the event of the permanent entering the battlefield with a modified version of that event. So how would we interfere with this process? It's a little bit harder than you might think at first glance because you actually have to do something before the permanent enters the battlefield. That's because replacement effects modify the event of the permanent entering the battlefield, so they have to apply immediately before that event takes place. So what would you do? And a lot of people in my comments section suggested something like Humility, which would remove all the abilities from any creature that's on the battlefield. Now, hang on a sec, is this going to work? Because if we think about it, Humility is a continuous effect. It takes away any abilities from creatures. But the creatures would have to be on the battlefield for Humility's effect to apply to them, right? So is that going to make it so that the replacement effects of Clone and Meddling Mage are negated? Because those replacement effects, like we talked about before, are not going to apply after the creature enters the battlefield, but before. So in order to see exactly how this is going to work, we're probably going to need to go into a little bit of technical detail about how these sorts of things happen. In fact, if you're really astute, you might have caught that there might be another level to this. So for example, creatures' abilities typically only function when those creatures are on the battlefield too. So if that's the case, how would something like Meddling Mage or Clone's ability be able to function at all? Because those abilities have to apply immediately before those permanents enter the battlefield. And that's a really interesting question. So let's take a look at the comprehensive rules, which helpfully has a specific rule devoted to talking about this exact process. Okay, so let's take a look here. This is a pretty long and dense rule, so I've cut out the parts that aren't really relevant to our discussion. But you can see that the first part of it answers our question that we were just talking about. If you have a permanent that's entering the battlefield, the game can look at that permanent to see if it has any replacement effects that might modify that event. Now we'll take a look at the second part of this rule that's relevant to our discussion. Notice here that this answers the second part of our question very nicely. When we're taking a look at any replacement effects that want to apply to the event of a permanent entering the battlefield, the game takes a look at how that permanent would appear when it's on the battlefield. And when it's doing that, it takes into account any continuous effects that might be modifying the characteristics of that permanent when it is on the battlefield. Okay, so that was a lot to digest, and it's probably pretty abstract. So let's take a look at how it would apply to this specific case to hopefully get a better handle on how this rule is functioning. So, if we have a Meddling Mage and it's entering the battlefield, normally what would happen is the game is going to see that this Resolving Meddling Mage spell is going to be entering the battlefield, and then it's going to look around to see if there's any replacement effects that might change this event. Fortunately for us, this rule does say that we are allowed to take a look at the Meddling Mage itself to see if it has any replacement effect, and what do you know, it does. So, in the normal circumstances, then the game is going to see that Meddling Mage has an ability that gives it a replacement effect, and you're going to get to choose a card name at that point. So what would happen if we had a Meddling Mage resolving when there's a Humility in play? Well, just like before, as that Meddling Mage spell is resolving, the game is going to see that there's a Meddling Mage that's entering the battlefield and take a look for any replacement effects that might modify that event. This time when we do that though, we're going to see something a little bit different. Notice how, when we take a look at what Meddling Mage is going to look like on the battlefield, Humility is going to be applying to it when it's on the battlefield, which means that the ability that Humility is taking away is not going to get taken into account. Therefore, when the Meddling Mage is coming into play with Humility out, the game is not going to see any replacement effects that need to affect this event, and you just won't have an opportunity to name a card. The Clone case is going to work pretty similarly. When the Clone is entering the battlefield with Humility out, the game is going to see that it doesn't have any abilities, and so therefore you also won't have an opportunity to choose a creature. So, if the Humility gets destroyed later on, then the Meddling Mage is going to be on the battlefield with no card named for it. because it already entered the battlefield, you're not going to get a second chance in order to go back and name a card now that it does have this ability again. You're just going to be stuck with no card named. Clone is going to be even worse off. When Clone was on the battlefield with Humility, well, it was okay. Even though we didn't name a creature to copy, we still were a 1/1 creature as a result of Humility's other ability. Of course, when Humility gets removed from play, then that ability isn't going to be applying anymore, and Clone is going to be put into its owner's graveyard as a state-based action for having 0 toughness. Again, it already entered the battlefield, so there won't be any opportunity for you to copy a creature even after the Humility leaves the play. Whew, that was a lot of talking about some really dense and high-level rules topics. Give yourself a big pat on the back if you understood this one all the way through. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again tomorrow for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.